Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
2022. Hurricane Ian emerges from the Gulf of Mexico and pummels southwest Florida with maximum sustained winds of 150 miles per hour and an unprecedented 12 to 18 foot storm surge. With landfall near Cayacasta Island, Ian becomes the fifth strongest hurricane on record to strike the United States and the most destructive storm for southwest Florida's barrier islands since 1926. In this documentary, you'll get to see many images of the devastating wreckage. But perhaps most importantly, you'll meet the Sanibel residents, business owners, and community leaders who not only weathered the storm, but are part of a recovery effort and resilient spirit that help maintain Sanibel's reputation as a special place to live, work, and play. In the 2 years following the storm, the Sanibel Historical Museum and Village interviewed dozens of these storm survivors and now presents Storm Stories from Sanibel, Hurricane Ian.
10 minutes until 3 p.m. Another hour. Slide off again.
If you write out a storm, your aspect is so narrow in that experience that the time seems to slow. The intensity of the rain, the wind, the sounds, the noise, the thunks and bangs of detritus slamming into your home, the home shaking, dismemberment of that island by the surge and the wind. I had no idea how destructive that storm was until maybe a week or 10 days later. But when the storm was finally gone, which is a misnomer, because hurricanes don't just last for a day, they last for years. It goes on for years. But when I walked outside, it was just, I can't even say a third world scene. It was a chaos of this terrible muck that I think had combined sand, petroleum, and grease, sewage, and it was as slick as grease. Everything was covered with it. So to walk was to, walk in peril. It was a physical assault, not just on myself, on all of us.
Like everyone else, as I watched the news coverage of the devastation on both Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach, I felt anxious, thinking about going over and seeing the islands that my family and I had called home and worked on for over 30 years.
Jim Anderson is a longtime Southwest Florida commercial photographer who co-authored and shot many of the photographs for this book about Hurricane Ian. The introductory note he wrote for his book provides a record of how the island appeared for those who were able to get back soon after the storm.
Crossing the patchwork of repairs that made up the causeway and finally entering the island was surreal. As I approached the four-way stop, looking to my left, I saw that Periwinkle Way was closed because the bridge was washed out. Trees were down everywhere. Any trees left standing were holding on to parts of buildings. Driving along the Gulf Drive, some of the buildings appeared to be slightly damaged, while others destroyed, burned to the ground, or missing altogether. With a drone, some of the houses and condos looked like dollhouses, because without roofs, you could see the individual rooms with furniture strewn about. It appears nothing escaped Ian on our barrier islands. On the east end of the island, the Sanibel Lighthouse now stood on 3 legs, and the buildings at the base were washed away. On the west end, near Captiva, the collapsed buildings I saw were once the Lazy Flamingo, Santiva General Store, the Mad Hatter Restaurant, and the Castaways Cottages. This book is dedicated to those who have lost so much. We will continue to cover the recovery and rebuilding of our islands.
It started in the afternoon and lasted through the night, and by morning time
it was still blowing the hill, but the water had gone down.
Ralph Woodring is no stranger to Sanibel's weather history. He and his wife Jean still live on the land his grandfather homesteaded in 1888. But their decision to stay in this home during Hurricane Ian produced many unexpected challenges.
Well, the first thing we'd ever expected the hurricane to be anything as mean and bad as it was going to be. So Jeannie and I stayed. We were sitting in the room out on the side porch there. And all of a sudden we were getting water coming up through the floor. So we decided that probably it was going to be mean enough we needed to move. And so we moved on upstairs, and Jeannie was smart enough to take a few things with us, a couple of pieces of clothing and some of our records. Anyway, she spent the entire hurricane upstairs, and I went up for a few minutes and looked out the window and see our boats going by, so I decided I better come down and try to salvage our boat if we could. But outside, the wind and water was so rough that I had to stay outside the rest of the hurricane. I didn't have a chance to get back in because the door was blown shut, pushed shut with the water and the hurricane wind. Looking back next day, the front porch blown off where we're sitting right now. The front half of the building was blown away. But in the meantime, everything was all broke down, blowed down, tore to hell, more trees and limbs and mangroves and anything you can think of was in the front yard. Mud everywhere. You had to be real careful if you stepped that you didn't slip and break your neck.
We stayed through the hurricane, and then I shot pictures just because that's what I do. I had no intention of putting them in a book. And then I just had quite a few people say, why don't you put those in a book? This cover was one of my favorite shots because this is Palm Ridge Road, actually. This is right in the middle of the road. There's actually a big X in the middle of the road, which I didn't know what that was. It was spray painted, and it was where the Chinook was supposed to land,
Wow.
so you can see it. So, and I was, of course, in the way. But so it's right across from the fire department, and so what they're doing is they're unloading MREs, the military food packs, stocking up the fire department. This here is actually used to be a preserve. So as you know, a lot of the preserves got turned into landfill units.
Right, this is long period
So
away.
yeah, it was so stinky. We live right across the street in down Vinca. So anyway, this is the big walk that we all took every day. Every day we took that down Dixie Beach. Yeah, this is where Mom lived. So this was the water coming up over her.
Oh my God.
Yeah. For me personally, seeing this devastation, I don't know, this hits me different than retail or furniture or anything. This, I don't know, just the books. I was just like, these are books.
When I got out here, it was probably like a week after they started letting people come back out on a boat and stuff like that. And most of the time we went down Middle Gulf and we just saw all the stuff down there. And me and my brother that was with me, we weren't even talking. It was just more depressing than anything else because just all the stuff and cars just flipped over and everything stuck in the trees. And so I went to one of my customers' houses on West Gulf and they had a car in their garage and the car was sticking out of the wall of the garage and just kind of looking at you. And we even walked around the back of his house and there's so much sand in his pool, we walked right across his pool. And then we were in the dunes when the golf cart started exploding and we just saw black smoke coming up and we were like, what is going on over there? And then when the cops came by and we were talking with him and he just told us that all those lithium batteries were just going off.
So at the end of West Gulf, where it comes to a cul-de-sac, a house caught on fire. I think it was from electric car, Tesla, I believe is what I was told. And it caught on fire, but in the process, there were explosions and anything else in the house that could explode did. And then it was a black smoke that came over for about 10 hours that day. Prior to the hurricane, there were 3 gorgeous homes across the street here. You couldn't see the ocean, you couldn't see anything. They were all landscaped and covered up, and they took a beating. So these 3 and the one next to that house were all destroyed. The elevation though here on West Gulf is higher. It's raised up a little bit. Considering it's per se a full pilot, garage had about 10 feet of water in it. Feet.
Like many longtime island residents who had survived earlier hurricanes, Tracy Sharp decided to weather the storm in her home. Based on earlier experiences with storms, she and her partner Liza Klaus and her 89-year-old mother had made plans to evacuate with their 3 dogs to a neighbor's house during the eye of the storm. But that strategy fell apart in the early hours when the water started rising more quickly than expected. So a new improvised plan was put in place to go to the highest place in their own home, an attic area where their air handler is located.
First couple hours were bad. First couple hours, there was a lot of water, trees started coming down, but it seemed like, wow, we can do this. It's doable. We're going to survive this. The last 4 hours weren't quite the same, and the wind started picking up, the water started picking up, and the water started coming in. And it was a muddy, gasoline water. So at that point, we started getting a little nervous about what was going to happen, and we had no communication anymore. We had lost that pretty early on. So eventually we had started getting everything up into the air handler and got Mom up there and lifted one of the Great Danes up through a little hole, and the French Bulldog, but the big 190-pound Great Dane, we couldn't get up there. So Liza was going to stay downstairs with her for a while, and we put mattresses on the master bed to try to get him up higher. The whole house was shaking, it was noisy, and the water kept rising. But after about 6 hours, we got through it. Started going down, things started quieting down.
Tracy and her family survived Hurricane Ian, but getting off the storm-wrecked island presented new challenges.
We'd seen helicopters, but nobody had stopped, and a guy dropped out of a helicopter and surveyed our situation, and he had told us we couldn't take the dogs with us. And we said, what do you want us to do? And he said, you're probably going to have to shoot them. And we said, oh no. And he said, well, the guy down the street had to do that. And I said, Mom needs oxygen, so you can take her to the hospital, but we were staying with the dogs. And he said, do you realize the bridge is gone? And we said, no, we had no idea. And he goes, it could be months till somebody gets out here to get you. And I said, then we'll wait months, we'll figure it out. I'm not leaving my dogs. And so then the next day they came back, they dropped a guy down, and they said they're gonna get a Black Hawk on the beach. It took about an hour and 45 minutes to get there, and right as we got there, the helicopter came. They got us all in. We were a little bloody and messy and muddy and nasty, but they got us in, and the captain of the helicopter, I guess, took a picture back at us with 2 Great Danes, my mom, a French Bulldog, and the 2 of us, and sent it to CNN, and they immediately put it on, and that's how our friends and family knew that we had survived.
So their friends and family found out they had survived from CNN, them riding a helicopter. I don't know, do any of you know Tracy Sharp, the Over Easy Cafe on Sanibel? It's one of the better breakfast and lunch places on the island, and hers was one of the, I don't know, as a documentarian, I would have to say better stories, even though it was tough. And the other thing I wanted to say about her, because I had it in the documentary, but I won't be showing you that clip tonight, is that her business, the Over Easy Cafe, right at the end of Periwinkle, where it runs into Tarpon Road, is that right? She was closed for 18 months, and they finally reopened. And here's the great part of that story. 85% of her staff came back to work for her. Wow. They all had to find other jobs during that period. Wow. 85% of her staff. I think I've always that just shows you what a quality outfit that is. And just as a little plug, she's actually she did reopen in her original location, but in July or August she's moving to a 2-story building. She's on the ground floor right now, so she's moving to a 2-story building. But we had other stories again that I can't show you tonight. Many stories about not quite as dramatic as Tracy's and Ralph's, but that we showed about other people that were impacted. But again, the story we were trying to tell beyond the wreckage was, again, Sanibel strong, resilience, recovery. So the first, I've got two more clips I want to show you. The first one is how the city of Sanibel responded. We also had clips about businesses and nonprofits and so forth that you won't see tonight. But I think you want to see really everything that went into the response. And the other thing is about the Sanibel Causeway. When the word first came out, oh, the causeway's out. It's like how can they possibly get anything running? Within years of getting that thing back up and running. But they did, and we're going to show you kind of how that happened now. Let's hope the sound is working. It is.
In the initial few days of our rescues and evacuating and getting people off island, because again, there was no sewer, there's no water, there's no food, there's no electricity, there's damage to homes, we have roofs that were gone, we had to get people off. We estimate removing about 1,000 people in those initial 4 to 5 days.
Prior to the storm hitting, we had prearranged a time based on what the track of the storm was going to be and how fast it would be moving it out of the area. We assumed that by 5 o'clock the following morning that we would be able to get back onto the island. So we established a rendezvous point at the toll plaza at the causeway with key personnel, and we were going to move on to the island as a team. While I was en route to the toll plaza to meet up, I received a call that said, don't come here, the road's out. You can't get to the toll plaza. And staff members who had walked the road had taken photos at the bridge, and the causeway is out.
So the major damage that took place along the causeway was to areas that we call the bridge abutments. So that is an area where there's still sand or fill underneath the roadway as it approaches the bridges and at connection point with the bridge structures. So you have 3 bridge structures, so you have 6 bridge approaches, and 5 of the 6 had complete failures, which meant there was complete separation between the bridge structure and the roadway itself. Then there's 2 islands here, and the spoil islands. Both Island A and Island B had complete washouts, cutting essentially new pathways or inlets kind of through, or channels through those islands. And so the one on Island A was about 800 feet wide by 8.5 feet deep. And then the cut through Island B was about 400 foot wide and about 4 feet deep.
Unlike any other event that I've experienced, and I've been involved in the response for a number of hurricanes, is that our main line of transportation to and from the island was out. And when you have a strong category 4, low category 5 storm come through, the vessels that would typically be available to bring us to the island were not available. As many people know, a lot of watercraft were destroyed and thrown up onto the shore. So it took a little bit of time for us to be able to get a vessel that we could start making our way back onto the island. So that was an immediate challenge that we had. We needed to begin our initial assessment of the island. We also needed to begin our search and rescue for people who decided to weather the storm here in their home and make sure that they were safe.
What we saw on island was apocalyptic. It was. It looked like we were in a zombie movie. We found bikes, Billy's bikes, everybody knows Billy's, and we found Billy's bikes in the mangroves, and we grabbed the bikes and we start riding down Periwinkle to head back towards the station, and massive trees were blocking the road and palm trees, and so we're having to throw the bikes over the palm trees just to get here. And I think the bike ride from the causeway to Station 171 next to CBS here on Palm Ridge took us probably about an hour and a half. And it was a disaster, and we would run into individuals and residents that really were just pale and like they had just gone through a really traumatic event and unable to really make complete sentences and just trying to figure out what really rocked their world over the last 36 hours. And that's when really that's when we knew, okay, we've got some major issues here, and we're in trouble.
anybody who's affiliated with a storm, a response to a storm, the term push means that you have debris fields that are in the way. So as you make your way through your community, in this case an island community, you have debris that's on the roadway. And that has to be pushed out of the way so you can get other vehicles and responses through the community. And that was a pretty significant challenge. We had one piece of equipment. As I said, the fire district started that initial push. Once our public works staff got on the island, that they took that over and started pushing debris. There was an awful lot of debris with a storm surge that ranged between 8 and 15 feet on the island. You can just imagine the amount of debris that was everywhere through the island. We had structures that were in the middle of the roads, vehicles that were in the roads, boats.
The island for the first 10 to 14 days looked like an absolute war zone. It was incredible to see Hueys and to see Blackhawks landing in such tight spots, and these pilots they have no fear. And they were dropping off pallets and pallets of water. And we have videos and pictures of us receiving MREs, receiving foods, receiving, pallets. And I can't say it enough, the response at a state level, and also honestly at a county level for this storm, it was miraculous.
Immediately right after storm, we were providing emergency operation support. So we flew about 40 missions, basically just flying people around, getting them eyes on the scene to figure out what we were dealing with after the storm. So that was the first part. And then typically after a hurricane, you have about 2 weeks before mosquitoes will be a serious problem. But with this one, it was interesting. It only took about a week. So for about a week, we were doing emergency operation support, and then the next week, we went into mosquito control, our typical job.
We started to move into what other operational needs do we have? We have a company that we activated before the storm. So we have pre-positioned contracts with companies that do debris management, and they're able to bring in assets as well that maybe a state agency might not be able to provide, but they're responsive to us. They also need, in order to get their equipment in here to begin to assisting with the push, we have to have a place for a barge to land. So both the Florida Division of Emergency Management called me and said, what do you need? And we need some equipment, response, and personnel to be able to operate that. They were coordinating a barge. So while our response efforts are underway, we have personnel that are on the island, we have our contractor who's on the island and starting to push debris, and our response efforts are really starting to come to a real routine, if you will, and that the operation is going well. We knew that we had to begin communicating with our residents who couldn't get here. So we started with these daily updates on Facebook Live so we could inform residents who might have been away. They might have been in Ohio or somewhere else in another part of the country where they had evacuated to. And as we started to provide information about cleanup, debris removal, rescue operations, structures that were damaged, lighthouse, folks wanted to know if the lighthouse was in place, which was really, important because of its symbolism here on the island.
So immediately following the storm, the damage was very apparent at the lighthouse. It was missing one of the support columns. The structural engineer that came out and assessed the site believes that when the caretaker cottages were lifted off the pilings, that one of the cottages clipped that column, taking the leg out. So for the city, it was paramount that we determine whether there was any structural issues with that lighthouse and to have them addressed immediately so that we did not lose, such an important part of our history. The engineer came out and he uncovered the footings. He went through every inch of the lighthouse. He determined that structurally the footings were sound, the rest of the tower was sound, and he designed a temporary leg that was later affectionately called the peg leg. And that was put in place to secure the lighthouse from any additional threats that had come for the remainder of that 22 hurricane season and bring us into 23 until the permanent repairs could be made. There was no trace of the caretaker cottages other than the cast iron pilings that were left behind. The cottages themselves, there was no sign of them, that we didn't find them, on the beach, just no signs. We did get a call from a resident in St. James City who found a wall. So we sent a crew out to take a look at that wall, and it was determined that it was not part of the caretaker cottages. And that was as close as we came to a potential spotting.
Initially, it was thought it would take months to rebuild the Sanibel Causeway and allow traffic to flow back onto the island. But the Florida Department of Transportation quickly marshaled the resources of 2 firms experienced in emergency road repairs, and the governor's office pledged maximum state support for the effort. That led to more than 100 crews immediately working on repairs that got traffic moving to the island in weeks instead of months.
First and foremost, the mission was restore access as quickly as possible. Everyone had that in mind. Everyone knew that the only way to get to Sanibel was by boat or by air, by helicopter, and so we needed to restore vehicular access ASAP.
Within 10 days, that causeway was open for vehicles, and we had a parade of bucket trucks that came over to start working on the infrastructure here on the island, and it was really an impressive sight.
The key to success there was that everyone who worked on this project is truly experts in their field. They knew what they were doing, and we knew what resources and what information and intelligence we needed from each other to ensure a successful project. So we had structural engineers on site, we had contractors on site, we had people who would come and take samples and go do analysis and report back to us. We had divers investigating the underside of the bridge structures to ensure that they were okay. And so at that point, it's just trust in the people that you have doing the work. They are experts in their field, they know what they're doing, and if everyone does the best job they can do at their expertise, success was going to be guaranteed.
I don't remember the exact date, but it was a day in December when we were able to start allowing our residents and contractors back on the island in a very controlled method. I know that some might say that it prevented them from getting to the island, but we had a lot of people who wanted to come to the island to sightsee, or that might have been here to rob vulnerable properties. And so we needed to make sure that we had a record of who's coming on the island. We had hurricane passes that were distributed, and the police personnel that were from the Sanibel Police Department and the mutual aid agencies that were visiting us and helping us staff those checkpoints. And if you didn't have a hurricane pass, you didn't get over that bridge. And that was really important, both to get people back on the island that needed to be, and to keep the people off the island that had no business being here.
I remember back in Hurricane Charlie in 2004, there were newspaper stories every day after Hurricane Charlie that the people on the islands wanted to get back to their homes. They want, and rightfully so. I mean, they want to see what damage was done. They want to get back. They want to start repairs and so forth. But you can see from this that it's a pretty mammoth job, especially, and Charlie wasn't as bad as Ian. And I interviewed about 28 people for this documentary, and there wasn't a single one that had a complaint that I talked to about how the city of Sanibel responded. So I think they deserve a lot of kudos for that. And we also, when we showed this documentary, premiered it earlier this year at the Sanibel Community House, people stood up in the audience afterwards who were residents there and said basically the same thing. Yeah, it took a while to get everybody back out there, but you see what they were facing. So I say, again, kudos to them. I've got one more quick segment here. It's the very closing